interactive. I'll introduce myself. My name is Valerie Complex, and I am a journalist writer. I do mainly a lot of film reviews. You can find me on Rotten Tomatoes. You'll find the majority of my work on a site called Black Girl Nerds. And I've written for everybody from The Nerdist to IGN, Geek and Sundry, Crunchyroll, you name it, I've written for it. That's it. So I'm gonna let everybody. You got an emergency?
No, it's me.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, is it an emergency? Okay. I'm just gonna let everybody introduce themselves and who they are and what they do, and we'll just go into it from there.
Hi, I am Mel Perez. I am also a writer for Black Girl Nerds, and I am a co-host of the Nerds of Prey podcast. And there are a lot of you in here. So I'm also going to tell you, because it's on here on the paper, to please rate the panel and give feedback on the DragonCon app, and donate to the official DragonCon 2018 charity Special Olympics of Georgia.
Hi, my name is Dominic Navarra. I was just invited on this panel. I think I should be pretty good at public speaking, considering I've done it a few times before. I'm a giant geek like the rest of you, but I haven't written for anything like these two lovely ladies here. I just kind of work at a bar, so.
No, I'm good, thank you. Thank you guys in the room. You guys hustled, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Renee, and I don't know the gentleman's name, but he's exhausted. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Tyree. This is my first DragonCon also.
Just in the house.
I mean, I don't really do anything. Hobbies? Video games, you know. That stuff, I go to the gym sometimes.
You shipping right now, OG. Okay. What's your favorite part about it? Yeah, what's your favorite part of Avatar?
Anytime Aang's in the Avatar state. What's your favorite part of Avatar?
I got on the Avatar bandwagon kind of late, but it doesn't matter because I am here now, and it's one of my favorite animated shows. I cried, I laughed. It was like such a dramatic experience for me. So this was actually put together by a philosopher from the University of Iowa. His name is Chris Moore, and he's a friend of mine, and he presented this at Anime Midwest. And I was like, I gotta bring this to the East Coast, but you know, I added my own sort of flair, and you'll see a lot of concepts from Dungeons and Dragons. Who here plays Dungeons, D&D players? So we talk about, I talk a lot about what is lawfully good, lawfully evil, neutral, and everything in between in regards to the Avatar universe. So with that, let's get right to it. Okay, so what does good suggest? Here are some concepts here that are written down, but in your opinion, raise your hand and tell me what you think the definition of good is. In the back.
Love and altruism.
Love and altruism. Anyone else?
Selfless creation.
Selfless creation. Anybody else?
Paragon.
I'm sorry?
A paragon.
A paragon. That's interesting. I've never heard that before, but a paragon, that works too. Well, see, the thing about good and evil is that they're just words, and it's what we attach to it that gives it its meaning. So if we look at the social contract theory, any psychologists in here? Okay. Are you familiar with the social contract theory? No? Okay. The social contract theory pretty much is, at its bare bones, the written and unwritten rules of our society, or the spoken and unspoken words of our society. So if I get up from this chair, then I will push it in and I will go about my business. That's sort of like an unspoken thing. That's, you know, it's manners. Or the written laws where it says you're not supposed to steal or anything like that. For example, Aang is pretty much the embodiment of the social contract theory because he believes people are inherently good and that people will come over. There's light in everybody, and he does what he does for the greater good. Would everybody agree about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you guys think?
I'd say Aang is a pretty good comparison to Aang. And if we're talking about like kind of how good he is, it's got to be like lawful good. He wants to be righteous in every way and save everyone, regardless of how evil they may be. Considering like Ozai could have finished him off, but he chose not to.
What do you think?
I mean, I agree with the same thing, but I feel like from all of what I've seen, Aang has also shown points of where he could have gone evil, but he internally chose to do good.
What do you think? Let's hold the mic so it's easier to pass.
I agree with what you said about Aang being lawfully good. I mean, the whole series, he was just very sunshine and happiness, except, when he found out his entire people got wiped out. But other than that, he was just, really positive, really looking for the best in people. Happy person.
I didn't want to cut you off, but we'll continue with your thought, and then Tanisha will, Tab and Kel will introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Talon Kell, writer, cosplayer, local Atlanta. Here to take part in this wonderful philosophical discussion about Avatar and Legend of Korra.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. These two gentlemen here are from the audience. They're very knowledgeable, and we're having a good discussion. So far, we're talking about the social contract theory, and we're talking about Aang. But what I'm going to go into next is what does, now that we've talked about a little bit about good, because we kind of know what it is, but what do you think evil suggests? What do you guys think?
Someone who generally wants to do anything that could hurt the feelings or physical being of someone else.
Okay.
Doing whatever you want in your personal best interest without regard for anybody else.
So someone who's selfish as opposed to selfless. Okay.
Well, going with the social construct theory, I would say somebody who's trying to be a social deviant, going against the norm of what everybody deems as good in the first place.
That's a good answer. One more?
I had a teacher who said being evil is being mean on purpose.
Mean on purpose.
Bad is just being mean on accident.
That's like that's the most basic and awesome answer I've heard. Like, what do you guys think is evil? Really quickly, tell me what you think you would classify as evil.
Azula.
Yeah, disagree. I don't like she's inherently evil.
I would say being evil is the ultimate selfishness. You're not thinking about anybody besides yourself. What you need, what you want, and if you hurt people on the way, that's kind of fun. To me, that is what evil is.
Ooh. Okay, so this is a tough one because I don't believe in good and evil.
We'll get there.
But I mean, ultimately, it does boil down to being willing to harm others, with or without your intent. With or without intent, it is possible to be evil and not know that you're evil. So, yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people in here have seen Code Geass. I know we're talking about Avatar, but, I believe in the fact that the way the main protagonist in Code Geass, he did everything in his power that he believed was good for someone he loved, but the other people around him saw it as evil and didn't trust him because of what he was doing. So I'm kind of on what she's on. I don't really believe in the good and evil, but
We'll get to that.
yeah.
Well, most would suggest that there's two types of evils. That there's a natural evil, which is when Mother Nature turns its back on us and does things like hurricanes or earthquakes or whatever. Those are evils that we don't have any control over. And then there's moral evil, which here says moral evils do result from intention or I'm sorry, I can't even see. Negligence, sorry, of moral agents. Murder and lying are examples of moral evils. For example, if only human beings are moral agents, then only human beings can perform evil actions. So if you read more, it's pretty much saying that the most harmful type of evil is a moral evil because you have a conscious choice whether or not to make it. Yeah.
So the natural evil we can kind of think of as like the forest spirit. It was wronged. The forest was burned, and it became a evil spirit that attacked villages and stuff. And of course, Aang had to stop it and show it its errors and make it good again. Which kind of suggests that there's like a balance to natural evil. There'll always be a good to the evil. And then the moral evil is just Azula.
I guess another example would be like the Fire Lord and him thinking that his own moral choices are for the betterment of the world, which is like bullshit. But that's what he believes is good. Mm-hmm. So and that's why when we get into this whole thing about good and bad not being real, we go to the schools of thought, which.
Oh, okay. Hey, so I don't know, I feel like when you talk about embodiments of nature, they have feelings and moral compasses, so it moves to a moral evil, as opposed to like the hurricane doesn't care how many people it kills.
Can y'all hear her?
No. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I can speak louder.
Use the microphone.
Oh, should I? Do you want me to? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Sorry.
If you have longer than like a thing to say, you can use this mic.
Okay, I feel as if like if it's something that's embodying something that is natural, it is no longer just natural, it's spiritual, so it has a moral compass that directs it.
We are getting there.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I got it all covered.
Okay, I got you.
Okay. But if you have another question, save it, because there's a time for questions too, and I will get to you.
Got you.
I'll get to as many people as I can. We get to some schools of thought where we talk about objectivism. Proper moral purpose of one's life is the pursuit of one's own happiness. Think of Unalaq and the fight for spiritual superiority, which is kind of what you were touching on, which we go into later. Nihilism. Sheesh. You would think oh my goodness. Okay, nihilism. Got it. May argue that there's no morality at all, but if it does exist, it's a human construct and thus artificial, which is where the whole, I don't know about good and evil and, it just is because people choose to do with it what they want. If people had not attached meanings to the word evil, evil might mean something good if we were not in the society that we were in. So what do you guys think about the whole morality, and speak more to what you were talking about before, where you don't think it is good and bad exist, and if you can put that into words.
I guess it's because I'm more into chaos. I won't even call it theory. It's just straight up like you have your existence and then stuff happens, and that's really it. And the stuff is neither good nor bad. It's just stuff that happens, and you have to deal with it. Sometimes it feels bad, but your feelings are just your feelings, and you're gonna have them regardless, and not even gonna make sense. But I don't believe in assigning that kind of good bad definition onto things, because it really doesn't fit. If you have, and I talk about this all the time, because if you're in a society and let's say stealing is bad, but you're starving and you have no resources, and the only way that you can eat is to steal, I'm gonna look at that person. They're not a thief anymore. They're a survivor. You know, the environment in which you live is going to determine whether or not something may be good or may be bad. But you know, I'm also that person. If we were going to go with alignments, I go true neutral with the leaning towards chaotic good, because the way that we define, I personally think that laws are in place to keep people who have power in power. I don't think they're there to protect people. Not like everybody. They are there to protect people and to maintain certain structures. And so when
Red Lotus member.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's straight up, like, that's what it is. And I actually had a really hard time with Legend of Korra with all the bad guys, because what they wanted, like their
We're gonna get to it. Sorry.
made sense to me.
No, because that's the thing about the Avatar series. We're gonna hold questions and just remember it. The thing about the Avatar series is that things aren't black and white. There's always this gray area that these shows like to play in, and it's up to us to determine what sides we're on. But I'm gonna go right into it. I got some videos coming up. Hopefully the sound works. But Avatar: The Last Airbender. So we go into the show with there being 100 years of peace, and then there's a genocide of the Airbenders, and so there's like this whole reign of chaos.
Wait, you're talking about in the beginning of Airbender or at the end, like the beginning of Korra? Where are you talking? Oh, okay. All right, go ahead.
So the internet decided who they thought
Chaotic evil
was good and evil. And I know we spoke about Aang being lawfully good, but they put him as neutral. And I think that goes back to what you mentioned before, because Aang, there are times where he could have, and he thought about it, but then was like, no, and then there, you know, what you guys were saying before, you know, he inherently sees the good in everybody, but some would say that that's just someone who's gray, so they would put him in the middle. Do you guys agree with this chart? Can you see it?
Yeah. No, not really.
No, I hear anger. I hear anger. I hear anger. We're going to save all the questions to like the last 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to try to get through this as soon as possible so we can get to as many questions as possible. So when we talk about like the person with the biggest sort of dealing with this concept of good and evil, to me, I felt it was Zuko. Because Zuko starts off, I would say Zuko would be sort of, I don't know, neutral evil. I don't know, because
I almost want to say lawful evil.
maybe lawful, because he is thinking it's for the greater good, because yeah.
Purpose. Yeah. Zuko kind of has his own like purpose and his own goals in mind, and he thinks that if he captures the Avatar, things will be fixed for him at least. So I'd say it's evil because he's thinking only of himself, but it's lawful evil because there's a method to his madness.
And right now I'm going to go into a video. I don't know if you can hear it. No sound. Are we? They both walked out the door. They're like, nope. Okay, so until they get back, this is the scene where, we see Avatar Roku, and we know that he, you know, what happens to him or whatever, and this is when, this is like right before, or, you know, with Zuko's confrontation. So, as you can see, I wish you could hear it, but we all remember this scene, right?
Yes.
Makes a conscious decision to sort of hi, I forgot your name. Can we set up the sound, or is there no sound? Oh, there's no, so that's a no. Okay. So I'll just skip ahead to this one.
Makes a conscious decision to leave a good behind. So, I don't understand the chaotic good, lawful, neutral. What does all that mean? I don't like D&D.
Oh, you need the D&D catcher.
I'm not going to worry about it.
We'll just go through the scene. You know, we'll just go through the scene. Here is where Zuko sort of discusses his sort of journey, good and evil, and how he decides to help the Avatar. And so some would say that he's a chaotic good because he's struggled over this arc. He went from being, as you would say, lawfully evil to sort of being confused and neutral, and now he's sort of chaotic good. And under this it says, I've always had to struggle and fight, and that's made me strong. So he's come out sort of on top and on the side of good. But I don't know, what do you think about Zuko's journey? Anybody?
I always love that phrase that to the villain, he's the hero of his own tale, and that is perfect for Zuko because he thinks the Avatar is a means to an end, and all he wants is to gain his honor back, to gain his home back, and in order to do that, he just has to get the Avatar. So if you told this story from another point of view, his point of view, it looks like he's the hero. And the Avatar is just this horrible, annoying kid who just will not give up. So for him, it's his whole journey was beautiful, just to watch it from beginning to end, how he just learned to stop being so self-centered, which makes sense because he's young, and learn to think of the broader picture outside of what he needed, what he wanted.
All right, so my first watching of it, I thought Zuko was great simply because he had such a great character development and so much growth in his character. My second time watching it, I was like, he's a punk. And, like, I understand that he grew up with a horrible family and all, but, yeah, he was a punk, and I couldn't really see him as anything. Like I really couldn't see him as, like, good or bad. He was just, this force of nature who just had to decide where he was going to align himself, and ultimately he aligned himself with who was portrayed to be the hero. I had issues with Aang because Aang, like, we follow him along, and he's supposed to be good the entire time, what we consider to be good, and yet the entire time he had a really hard time doing what needed to be done in order, like, to be responsible for his position, his role in the universe.
He's 12.
Even so, like, I understand.
Didn't Korra like embrace it like at 4 when she was like busting out the window like I'm the Avatar? So she was confident. So
Korra handled it in a bad way.
but I know how that manifests, and I'm gonna get to it. Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah, she was tall, but we're gonna get to it.
I think Zuko's story is probably the most interesting part of Avatar for me personally, because it does, like she said, shows a lot of character growth and development, and he really kind of switches his sides completely on the moral compass. He goes through the journey believing one thing to be right, and then when he believes, he's done his task, he thinks he'll be happy. He's not. He even says he's not. And this kind of is his flip into seeing that what I was doing this whole time was incorrect. And I just love that kind of, self-reflection and just vision.
I'm sorry, I don't mean. I'm trying to make it quick and succinct so we can get to as many questions as possible. So, pretty much, some of us disagree. Some of us may agree with where Zuko ends up. But
Zuko always chose he always chose to do the selfish thing every single time, and the only reason that he even changed was because circumstances changed in such a way that he was like, yeah, I got it, so, and this wasn't what I wanted, so I guess I'll try this other thing. Mm-hmm. Like, every time he could make a choice about it, though, he chose to be selfish every single time. He's a punk.
I gotta defend my boy Zuko.
Punk.
I'm sorry to the teenagers in the room, but he is a teenager, and that is teenage behavior.
Teenage.
Yeah.
Yes.
He had everyone's teammates. He had enough. He had enough for the
the entire
Teen
show.
angst mixed with
And then watching
abusive
him
fathers.
grow, he literally grew as, in body and in mind.
He grew when all of his decisions still got him in like a crap place. So
Okay, so we want to see the fight outside.
Let's go. Let's fight.
Be sure to stick around for that. Pay-per-view is $9.95. Okay, so you both have brought up really great points, and I'm glad that we don't all agree because it makes for a really interesting discussion. But whether or not we dig it, we dig Zuko, or we don't, he had some dope. He had a dope arc, even more so to me than Aang, because we actually got to see a bit of a difference, at least for me, with him. So the internet would name him chaotically good. Do you agree with that? No. No? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Wow.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you agree. Raise your hand if you, I guess that's everybody else. So now that we've talked a little bit about the last Airbender, we're gonna get to the Legend of Korra. And so Legend of Korra, I don't think is, it's not the perfect show, but it really broke, sorry. That's just, I think that's the writer and like the movie TV critic in me. The fan in me loves the show, and it made me cry, and it made, I went through all these emotions. But one thing that it does well is that it breaks down the different types of what is good and what is evil, and explores the gray areas in depth, like what you mentioned earlier, about how everybody, every villain had a purpose that they thought was good for the world. We know that Republic City is like this metropolitan melting pot city where people live among, firebenders and airbenders and, well, not airbenders, firebenders, and all types of people are within the city. And so in season 1, we deal with the Equalist, which I guess some would say communism. I'm not really comfortable with that word, but I just left it there. Season 2 deals with the mysticism. Season 3 deals with the anarchy, and season 4 deals with totalitarianism. Again, the internet has their opinions, and Kuvira is not one here, and that's actually something I'm going to talk about later. But
Kuvira's on.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I need to put on my glasses. Oh my God, I'm like blind as bat. I don't have time to look for them. I'll just pull it close. Okay, so what are we thinking about this list here? What are we thinking about the arrangements?
I don't like Korra's. I think Korra and Bolin need to switch.
I agree.
That's fair.
Yeah, because Bolin, they had him down as chaotically good.
He's not chaotic.
No, he's not. He's been pretty neutral throughout. I also don't know if I agree with lawfully neutral and true neutral. I actually think she's been pretty lawfully good, and they just didn't care. So, right here, chaotic evil is Zahir. So, got that far. Shame. Some would say that Amon is a neutral evil just because he wants that sort of equality within Republic City. This would be a clip of him talking about that, but since we have no sound, I'm going to move on. His whole thing is collectivism, the emphasis on the group, and he's a sort of neutral evil because his character is typically selfish and has no qualms about turning his back on whoever. He turns back on his brother and his family. He even turns his back on other benders because he just didn't care because his agenda was more important. What do you think about Amon and sort of his ideals about being equal and getting rid of all of these, all these people within Republic City?
Just waiting for you to stop talking. Amon was fighting oppression, straight up. The non-benders were very clearly being oppressed by the benders in the city. They didn't have representation in the government, and it was a problem. His motivations for it, I mean, they were driven by some selfish things, and I wouldn't even call it selfish. He just didn't. It was all bet on his relationship with his father. and that was the, he just said, you know what, people who bend have too much power, they shouldn't have that power. That was a very extreme view. But ultimately, what ended up happening, that ended up being the middle ground was, non-benders actually started having a say in the governing and having more power in the city, which they did not have prior to, his rebellion.
I think a lot of the villains in Korra kind of represent a sort of extremism. Amon wanted equality, but took it a little bit too far instead of, he wanted to reverse the situation. He wanted the benders to be oppressed instead of the non-benders.
Yeah, he keeps his power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also keeping his own power. And I guess it just goes to show that there could have been some way of dealing with it, meaning that if he had not gone to extreme lengths, there may have been a peaceful solution, but he went far enough because he thought that was the only way that it was going to work.
Yeah, I think the way he went around it was, the force was probably the wrong way to go about it. And the fact that he would keep his bending was also another wrong way to go about it. I mean,
Yeah, my thing with Amon is that if he truly believed in what he was saying, he wouldn't have lied about everything. He lied about being attacked, he lied about the scar, he lied about the bending, he lied about everything. For me, that makes everything that he said subject. He didn't want the benders to have power. If he could have taken the power of every single bender and had power for himself only, he would have taken that. And to me, that makes him evil. Completely evil.
Yeah, So, I mean, and I get where everybody's coming from with this, as far as him coming across as evil. We also, the thing that struck me, and when I was watching Legend of Korra, is that we're coming to Legend of Korra after the Fire Lord had basically ripped apart everything, and so now you have a society that is used to living under a dictatorship and having to fight for freedom from that. And when you apply that, if you think about that in our culture, if we did not have, the power structure that we have, how would things shake out? The way it worked out in Legend of Korra was that there was always a power void, and then somebody would step into that power void and then do the exact same type of oppression, but just on a smaller scale. Instead of it coming from the Fire Nation, it was happening internally in the different areas in the different cities. You saw it in the Earth Kingdom, that's one of the best examples, Ba Sing Se with the Empress. You just saw these various systems of this kind of dictatorship leading and oppression that people did not know how to live without now. So I got with him, when I saw Amon was like, all right, here we have these people who are in power, and every time we try and say we're going to make it more equal, somebody else with that power steps into that place and then abuses their power. Korra was doing it all the time. Anytime she entered a situation, she would try and bend her way out of it. She was beating up non-benders, and finally somebody was like, what you doing? All they knew was how to have the oppressors change places.
That's really interesting where you say
I have something to say. It's not a question, but I really want to add it. Please.
Okay.
Please. Okay. Okay, so what I have to say is basically that what I seem to see in a lot of shows, even Korra, is that the main difference from what the world view of good versus evil is whether you handle a situation, whether you think you're wrong or right or not, is if you handle it peacefully versus aggressively. Because it seems like everybody that is considered bad in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra is whether they handle it aggressively through chaos, through fear, through panic, or whether they're trying to create a peaceful, calm situation that ends in some sort of balance. It seems to be less good versus evil and more peaceful versus aggressive.
I agree with that 100%. In fact, I had an issue with Korra specifically for that. With Kavira at the end, where she wouldn't, where she was like, "Oh, I'm going to forgive her." That whole narrative where you were supposed to forgive somebody who's about to take you out and doesn't care about your life, that's nonsense. I'm going to tell you right now, if y'all walk out of this with anything, no to that.
Steven Universe.
Woo! I don't watch that.
All right. We're going to catch you after this panel. I know there's some hands up, and I promise I'm going to get to y'all. What? So I'm going to get to book 2, which features Unalaq. I know season 2 is not everybody's favorite. It's not my favorite. It's like they didn't know that the show was going to be on again, so they're like, let's write this. Despite that, Unalaq would be considered chaotically evil, only because he's trying to bring Vatu into the world, and Vatu is like darkness, and then in darkness there's chaos and all this stuff. No.
Okay, so like the first Avatar messed up, and to be honest with you, if you were going to have true balance in the world, you would have to have a good Avatar and an evil Avatar, because the problem was that the first Avatar split them apart. They were in this eternal tug of war. He split them apart, and then it just started causing problems. And the reason why he even became the Avatar was to make up for that mistake.
See, this clip was of that, but we didn't really hear it. So, but it was just about we talked. It talks a little bit about what Avatar 1 does and how he splits them up, and things like that. But there's, of course, so there's no duality. But does that mean that that's wrong?
I mean, if the whole thing is balance, if good can't exist without evil and evil can't exist without good, then I mean, they're supposed to be one part and another part. It's just, I mean, that's what makes sense.
But the whole idea of them being together is that there's no black or white. There just is, and they just exist.
Kept it so that it was a zero-sum game. But once they were separated, then it started weighing heavily in one area and then into another. And when that happens, if you have, 100 years of prosperity, it makes sense that you're going to turn around and have some horrible stuff happen, because that has to balance out.
Well,
on that point then, since Aang wasn't around and Fire Lord Ozai was, and he was planning to destroy anything anyway, wouldn't that mean he was weighing more heavily on the evil side?
See, yeah, I want to add on that. The balance is people are awful. They are. People are the evil. You don't need Vatu coming in and then making things more evil. People are evil. They just are. And like you said, as soon as the Avatar was gone, look at what happened to the world.
And I think when you look at Unalaq and what he represents was sort of this, bringing this sort of mysticism back, and that's what we need to sort of bring back the balance. And of course, he doesn't really give a shit about what anybody wants. This is what he thinks is good for the world. So what do you
I think Unalaq's a manipulative prick. And he is by far the most hated villain, like more so than Azula. Like, this guy I hated him. Like, he was such a jerk. And the whole mysticism thing is, just the whole, like, oh, I'm gonna teach you the ways of the spirits while having this ulterior motive. It's like, really kind of frustrated me in that regard.
I think, it seemed like an easier sort of task in my eyes for Korra to sort of defeat, because she taps into sort of that white light, that spirituality, but it also took away her connection to the past avatars, which they never rectified, and I just don't understand that. But if we move on to book 3 and we talk about, I was trying to wait till the end.
I was just gonna add something to the balance with good and evil.
Okay.
So can I add that real quick?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so something I've noticed in a lot of shows. Well, actually, no, I haven't noticed it in a lot of shows. Is a lot of shows don't talk about how two forces need to balance each other out, which is why I think I like Miraculous Ladybug a lot. because they talk about how creation and destruction, they need to be there to balance each other out, and neither one is purely good or purely evil. They're just there, and they need to be there to balance each other and make sure that the world doesn't fall into complete and total chaos. So good and evil need to be there to ensure the world doesn't fall into complete and total chaos. That's why yin and yang exist.
I'd like to really quick touch on that. If the two sides are good and evil, and one side loses, does that always give you chaos in the end? So if good and evil, fighting, evil loses, does that world fall into chaos if everything is good? Which is kind of like a contradiction in and of itself. So if evil is chaos, then the balance to that would be good. Yeah, order.
All right.
So then the order would be lumped in with good, according to this kind of format.
See, and again, we're talking about these dichotomies, and these dichotomies don't actually exist. Chaos is. Things just happen. Order is created. It's not a real thing. It's not a real thing in our society, in our world. It's something that we try to impose on ourselves, and actually I would say some try to impose it more than others, but they still aren't real things. Like honestly, chaos is the natural state. That's why you have all these things that happen and nobody can explain it. Nobody understands it. We want to say that there's some order to it, so then we bring in religion and we come up with explanations, and we study it, and it's science. And even so, with everything that we learn there's so much more that we don't understand. So all of this is chaos all the time.
Well, I think especially in this third season with Zahir, he sort of caught everybody off guard with the sort of chaos he brought, and also introducing new skills and abilities as an airbender. And then his ideals about, getting rid of the lawful state and everybody just doing what they want. I found his character to be interesting because he wasn't really after power. He was just after getting rid of power. And I can't recall if he talks about giving power back to the people. If that was his thing, giving power back to the people, but he didn't really want to be in charge. He just wanted the people to have and do what they wanted to do.
It's kind of like why I like Zahir as more like lawful evil, because he murdered the Earth Queen, and that was very lawful. I'm glad he did that. She was a bitch.
But was it lawful? Because she was a horrible person, I agree with that. But then, what happens next? I mean, there's now a vacuum of power, and you saw what happened. Everybody lost their minds. Who's going to go in there and clean everything up? Who's going to make sure the city keeps running the way it's supposed to be running? No one. There's no one in charge of anything.
I know, we started to see more of, Suyin and the people, the metal benders and stuff like that. And when he sort of did away with that void, we saw people like Kuvira who were lawfully good. She was, helping, against the sort of resistance and the Red Lotus and everything like that. And then once that void was open, then the game changed. And it was like, okay, well now we have to unite, but we have to unite under a different banner, which is sort of totalitarianism. And I know I find that book 3 and book 4 are really sort of interconnected in that way, especially in going to book 4, where that was a video of Aman. With book 4, where Zahir actually offers assistance to Korra with the spirit world. Do y'all remember that, right? Because their interests finally align, and that made me really question. Like, okay, so I see where Zahir was coming from, and I see why he was sort of helping Korra with defeating Kuvira. So what do you think about that?
I don't
A lot of book 4 seemed to be Korra's inner struggle of not really knowing how to handle the situation, which actually just seems to be a lot of Legend of Korra. So Zahir offering Korra help was interesting because, again, like she said, their interests aligned. Zahir was very much like an anarchist, and Korra needed to stop this totalitarian state that Kuvira was kind of creating. So in a way, they came together for the same cause, but not really for the same outcome.
Please.
So Legend of Korra was rough. No, it was actually a rough series. First time I watched it, I hated Korra. I was like, she's so impulsive and always just swears she knows what's right, and she had no idea what was going on. And but she got hit with a lot really, really quickly, and didn't have time to really process things and get the whole learning what's going on and all the dynamics that are at play. And I know I was also comparing it to Last Airbender, and Aang had a real clear purpose in that. It was a very clear enemy, someone who was definitely wrong that he needed to go after. Korra had these people who had ideals that she actually somewhat agreed with and had to figure out how to navigate that without hurting anybody, and basically learned that was impossible. Like I said, it was rough. I actually saw why all of the bad guys were there, and I saw that the purposes that they had were not necessarily, not unneeded. And then there's also the fact that, again, that society had been basically under a violent dictatorship for a very long time, and people were trying to reconceive how are we supposed to govern ourselves, and no one really knew. Kuvira, she messed it up when she went into basically dictator mode herself, and she wasn't really about trying to help people. She was about trying to get everybody united under her. It makes it all very, very challenging.
I just wish they would have explored why that happened. She went from good to evil to neutral. They didn't really explain that. But we got time for questions. So if you guys want to get up to the mic, so everybody can hear you, that would be great. We'll go as long as we can. Go ahead.
Okay, just real quick. Nobody grew up as much as Korra did in this entire series, both series actually. And as for Zahir, I see it made sense for me. It made sense to me for him to want to work with her because he's all about giving power back to the people. And having a dictator is taking all the power away from the people. And then for me, also, him trying to kill Korra, in a way, it wasn't really personal. He just really wanted to end the Avatar. So then now that he shot a shot and then it ended, he was willing to work with her.
So what you got?
So the way I see it, the first Avatar series is more about religious philosophy about what is good and evil, and it was talking about the internal struggles, while Korra was about political ideology of what is good. So as you pointed out, the Fire Lord and Zuko all have the internal stuff about the nature of making people happy, while Korra is sort of a meditation on, anarchy, fascism, equality, communism. Each of those villains were striving for a ideal to go for, and each of them held a certain ideal as the ultimate good, and they all fought for that ideal. And Korra had to sort of really process about those political ideology, where Aang just had to sort of get over a big sort of evil. And so the whole point of Avatar is not to come up with an answer, but to more craft the questions that one should ask. So I think you guys are all talking about the individualities, but you're not talking about the questions that the show was asking. You're talking about the answers, but none of the questions. And so that's just my input on the whole thing.
Yeah, and on that, I think because in the first one that it was a religious, in the second one was it was more political. It's like showing the differences in time. Like nowadays, our things are more political and somewhat religious, but in the Avatar, the first one is religious, and later on it's political. It's showing that now religion doesn't really matter. It's more political matters.
I really like that the idea of the first series was this the religious kind of part of it, and the second part was the political part of it, and that kind of reflects our own history where it evolved from religious to political in actual society, and I think that's how it's a good portrayal of all that stuff. And I like how in Korra everything, all of the villains she has to overcome, there's a way for her. I mean, there is a solution that could be ended peacefully and at a middle ground, but it's basically just two extremes going at each other.
Before you go, let me know what questions you're referring to, because you mentioned we're not asking the questions, but you didn't say what questions you wanted. You didn't mention what the questions were. So I'm gonna let them get to their questions, but you can stay and let me know for next time.
I think one of the things you guys are missing is that while Avatar: The Last Airbender is a Western show, it is informed by Eastern morality. When you look at yin and yang, it's not necessarily good and evil, it's also light and dark, destruction, creation. And we see in all of the villains of Korra, everything they do causes good change. Amon does bad things, but it leads to a positive change where everybody in Republic City is more informed about the needs of the non-benders. You can't ignore that Eastern philosophy, and you can't necessarily apply that to our Western morality. In the same way that I don't agree that, I think it's reductionist to look at Zuko as being purely selfish, because when you include the idea of honor and the needs of the family and to retain family honor, I agree that he's evil and I agree that he's selfish, but I think it's a lot more complicated because you can't just ignore the fact that what he sees in himself is not just a lack of honor for himself, but a lack of honor for his entire family, and that helping to catch the Avatar is not just to restore his own place at the table with his family, but to help his family, and that, especially in Eastern culture, is so fundamental that you can't just say, well, he should have just done the right thing. He was doing the right thing. Helping his family is just so absolutely fundamental to his core that reversing that took an entire change of who he was. He was no longer the Zuko of season 1.
I feel like it really kind of was even bigger than that. Okay, it was all on his nation too. He was embarrassed.
Well, his family was his nation.
His family was his nation. Culture. Yeah. So like he is burned and like has to redeem himself and his image, his family image, and all that stuff. So I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
No, I think that we need to take a bigger step back and think about how this storyline is being run through Western eyes, and the writers of it are Western, and that what this story actually does in a very big picture kind of way is teaches you to have empathy for people who do you wrong, and it teaches you to keep their humanity in the forefront, which I think is actually a detrimental message to a lot of people. Because sometimes I think we have too much empathy for our enemies.
That's a good point.
So a subject I want to touch on is the spirit binds. So that's like a clear analog to nuclear energy. So I kind of want to know what you guys would think of how the different avatars would have reacted to that kind of technology and its proliferation.
That's a really good question. I can. It's really hard too, but I think thank you for asking. I think what I can deduce is a lot of the inhabitants of Republic City thought of the spirit mines as a sort of evil thing, but it wasn't. It wasn't like a natural evil or anything. It just was because while Avatar 1 closed the portal, Korra opened it, and neither choice was good or bad. It just was. As far as the technology. I don't know exactly how they would feel about that. I'm gonna process it and give me an email and I'm gonna email you.
What do you guys think?
I was sort of thinking about you said how the other avatars would react to it, right? Is what you wanted to kind of.
Wait, sorry.
You said you wanted to kind of like get our ideas of how the other avatars would react.
Yeah, how like Aang and Korra would deal with that.
Well, we know how Korra dealt with it. I think Aang would go along a similar kind of way where he would try to use his, because Korra again had to enlist the help of many people to defeat Kuvira and her giant mech and the vines and stuff. I think Aang and his friends would have to find a way to do that as well. And if they didn't have the same technology to cut through the mech with like the lasers that Asami's father had, they would have to find some other way to do it with their bending or Isaka's intelligence and his strategy. But they would find a way to do it.
I'll just say real quick that I'm not even sure if Aang would have opened the spirit portal and left it open to begin with. Yeah.
And I would just like to add that we're forgetting the fact that Korra and Toph both used divines to actually watch the world. What Kavira and her team was doing was kind of perverting the whole use of divines in a lot of ways. I mean, it was actually cutting off their contact and resulting in divines, reacting to it in a very negative way. So I think they would have, other Avatar, I think Aang would have squashed it. He would have been like, y'all can't use divines like this. They actually have a natural purpose that is useful and helpful for the world.
We have 5 more minutes.
Yep, thank you.
Alright. My question is about standards. When you're talking about good characters versus evil characters, you're making absolute judgments, but you're not using an absolute standard. You say that selfishness is evil, but you've also listed examples of selfishness that is good. We see that chaos is evil, but we also see that complete order is also evil. But the opposites were good as well. There was the opposite of chaos, which is order, in the Unalaq arc, which was order. In that case, order was evil, but in the Kavira case, complete order was evil, and we needed some element of freedom. So when you talk about these standards, you use absolute terms, but you don't. Where exactly is the standard coming from? Is it coming from the perspective of the protagonist? Because that's what I'm seeing. Is we're seeing all these villains and we're making absolute judgments because they are the antagonist and not based on some other kind of standard.
Yeah, you can't include me in that one. That's y'all.
I think it was the social contract.
Social,
I'm tired.
Social contract theory.
Yes, that we talked about in the beginning. That's where we're getting all of it from. Because if you think about it from a certain point of view, Aang's unwillingness to kill Ozai, that could be seen as selfish. Like, he couldn't do that because it goes against what he believed, but it's something that would have saved everyone.
I feel like it's not so much. I'm kind of like looking at it from our society as like our base perspective, and I don't agree with selfishness being evil. I think selfishness is inherently human. It's something that really is in every single person. You should put yourself first. For survival, for all that stuff. And I think Zuko doing that for himself was not incorrect in believing that, but he did not take into account also the how it would affect the rest of the characters as well. So he believed he was right even if it hurt other people, and obviously that flipped later in the series. But yeah.
I'm sorry, we have time for one more question. Sorry, I ran late. For those of you who didn't run out, I appreciate you staying, but we got time for one more question.
Who thought we would get this deep in this panel, by the way?
Okay, so my question deals with the morality of my personal favorite character, Uncle Iroh.
Yes.
As far as him, even though he is my favorite character, he knows exactly what Zuko is for the majority of the series, and yet totally enables what is some pretty terrible behavior.
For me, it seems that Iroh's motives are opposite to the statement I just said, so contradiction. He is the least selfish character in I think all of Avatar, where he's always putting other people before himself. He is looking out for his nephew 100% of the time, no matter what. He wants Zuko to be happy and succeed. So at first, Zuko would be happy if he captured the Avatar and go back home. That changes and then Iroh wants to help Zuko defeat the Fire Lord, and that is his kind of goal in that respect. Iroh seems like the kind of person who wants to help everybody around him who is willing to open themselves up.
I think Iroh switched up like that because Zuko switched up. Since he's his uncle and he's overseeing his nephew, and like you said, he wanted him to be happy, so he's letting his nephew make his own decisions, and as his uncle, he's supporting him. Yeah. That's I guess that's the way he thought he'd find his best happiness that way.
I'd like to see who Iroh was before his son died. To see what kind of person he was then.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Was he evil like Ozai because of when he attacked Ba Sing Se, or was he still the humble, kind old man that we've come to know and love?
And on that note, we're going to end it because that is a really good question and it's something to think about. But thank you all for those who stayed. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. A few of you guys were asking what this was. Did you not read the title? This is the DragonCon Avatar Good versus Evil panel. Essentially what they talked about were morality and the different characters, the ideas behind good and evil, the different philosophies, and the differences between Avatar The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. So yeah, thank you all for watching once again. If you like this video, make sure to like this video. Favorite, comment, subscribe, and ding ring that bell so you'll be notified whenever we live stream. Thank you all once again for watching and have a great day. This is Jeff Black, logging out. Peace.